Hoş geldiniz. I will speak in English to make sure that we all understand because it was announced as English at the lecture. This is a small joint program between, in fact, Burcu Kütükçüoğlu from Bilgi University and SALT. Burcu will give you a frame around it, but I would like to remind you that SALT kind of hosts these talks, but also programs around built environments quite, I would say, extensively. And last year, within this context, we invited Istanbul Technical University and we collaborated with Ayşe Şentürer on 2 lectures. And this year, we programmed this small series called Mediterranean Talks, which is a topic that Burcu Kütükçüoğlu discusses in her lectures at Bilgi. And Jala Makhzoumi, who's our guest tonight, will specifically talk about the landscapes around, the idea of landscapes, I think, around the Mediterranean. But I would like to ask Burcu to give a short introduction. Thank you.
Welcome and good evening. First, I think I must really thank Meriç and Laurence and all the SALT team, of course, for providing this platform to make these public lectures on the Mediterranean space. Actually, I've been conducting a graduate seminar called Mediterranean Architectural and Urban Imagery in Istanbul Bilgi University. And I've been inviting guest lecturers to talk on the different aspects of the Mediterranean space, including Professor Nusret Dalfes, who's here. And then, I came up with the idea that these lectures could be more public and could reach a larger audience. And I talked to Meriç, and she was really interested, and SALT really generously supported this idea. So thank you very much. And thank you for Jala Makhzoumi, of course, because she's our first guest lecturer. She accepted our invitation very kindly. Today, let me read. Today I'm extremely glad to introduce you Professor Jala Makhzoumi from American University of Beirut to give a lecture on the natural and cultural landscapes of the Mediterranean through the framework of ecological landscape design and case studies from around Eastern Mediterranean. Professor Makhzoumi studied architecture in Baghdad, received her master in environmental design at Yale University and PhD in landscape architecture at Sheffield University. She's affiliate faculty at the American University of Beirut, where she contributed to establishing the BS Landscape Design and Ecosystem Management. She is the author of several internationally acknowledged publications and the co-founder of Unit 44, a Lebanon-based practice offering a wide range of services in architecture, landscape architecture, ecological planning, and urban design. So thank you very much, Professor Makhzoumi. Please.
Thank you very much. I think this is okay. Thank you very much, Burcu, and thank you, Meriç, for inviting me to speak. I am honored and very happy to be here. And thank you all for coming. My talk, I think Burcu introduced my talk, and I was going to say iyi akşamlar. Sorry, I forgot. I will be talking about, first of all, I'd like to talk about the Mediterranean natural setting, as Mediterranean as an ecosystem. Then I'd like to talk about Mediterranean nature-culture co-evolution, how the two work, which is very, very specific to the Mediterranean, I think. And then I will offer a landscape reading of the Mediterranean, and then a landscape writing of the Mediterranean, proposing some concepts and ideas derived from that reading. And then I will take 3 examples that I'd like to discuss, which come from, one is rural, from Cyprus, North Cyprus, and the other 2 are from Lebanon. It is a long lecture, so I apologize in advance for that, but I will try to go through it as quickly. Most of the slides, if it's going to be on web, I have put all the full references. So if anybody is interested in pursuing any one of the themes, I think it would not be very difficult to do that. The Mediterranean ecosystem. Ecosystem is really the collection of abiotic, biotic, and human components of an environment, and it is their interaction, how they interact among each other and how they interact among their environment. So in essence, ecology is very much a very dynamic field of study because it looks at evolution, how systems evolve, how they work, and processes that tie them. So looking at the Mediterranean as an ecosystem is significant in many ways. The Mediterranean ecosystem is generally defined through climatic criteria, namely temperatures and precipitation, and it generally lies between the latitudes of 40 north and 40 south. It is an environment that's not restricted to the Mediterranean basin, but also in 5 other areas: in Chile, in South America, in California, in South Africa, and in southern Australia. And these places have in common the plants that grow there, the climate, and if you revisit these regions, you'll find that they are all wine-producing regions because they have the characteristics of the Mediterranean. However, the Mediterranean basin is the one that has had the most longer settlement and human habitation. These regions are also ideal for agriculture and for human habitation. So it's a very, very, in a way, easy environment. So you have here some of the diagrams showing the characteristics of a Mediterranean type climate. Basically, long, droughty summer where there is no rainfall. And you can see on the left-hand side, the darkest is the one with the shortest dry season, and the white is the one with the longest, 7 or more dry months, which means that the plants have to be adapted to this kind of environment. And to the right, the top, you can see also the precipitation also the temperatures. Yes. So the rainfall in millimeters. Again, it follows the same pattern, and the satellite image from Attenborough's book below reflects also these. But if you look at the upper map, you will see this line. This is a very important line because this is the northern limits of the olive tree. And the dashed line is the southern limit of the olive tree. So in a sense, the Mediterranean is the region of the olive tree, really. It is symbolized by that. This dashed line is also the top limit of the date palm tree. So you can see how the two ecosystems meet. The Mediterranean, it's not just a matter of climate, but the Mediterranean historically has evolved through many changes, geological, seismic, that have created volcanic, that have created a very convoluted and complex geomorphology, topography, and so it's also a region of mountains, as you can see from the diagram. And these mountains have created micro environments that are habitats. So it creates a diversity of habitats. And the diversity, which we will see, the diversity of plants that we see, mirror the diversity. The image here of mountains and forests is from Cyprus. Most of my images are either from North Cyprus or from Lebanon. This is, again, a very simple diagram showing how through movement and erosion, the Beshparmak range in part of the Kyrenia range peak was formed. And these are sketches by a geologist, Greg Horn, who lived in Cyprus for many years. And in the end, this gives the landscape itself its form. The Mediterranean is also a biome, a well-known biome known also as chaparral. This is the term used. It is the dark brown that you can see along the edges of the Mediterranean. Mainly biomes are biogeographic regions where you have, they're subunits of the biosphere, of the larger living envelope that encircles our planet. And with more or less, these biomes have more or less homogeneous plant cover and generally also climate and temperature, as we said. Mediterranean is also, all of these are overlapping, is one of the world's biodiversity hotspots, meaning that it has a very high diversity of species, both mainly plant, but also some faunal species. And you can see like some of the asphodel, wild gladioli, and cyclamen. And also in here you can see it is on the migrating route of storks, of a lot of birds that, and again that brings in further diversity. So it is very much valued as such. Mediterranean forests, very little remain of the Mediterranean forest because a lot of them have been lost. I think there's about only 15% of forest land have remained. The rest have been lost, not just human action, but also through heat waves and different geological periods that have affected it, but also through. The key species of the forests surrounding the Mediterranean are mainly pines, oaks, oaks mainly in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, and cedars, of course. You have cedars in Turkey, and there are cedars in Lebanon. And this is a view of the cedars from Lebanon, and pine forests also from Lebanon. What happened is that initially the forest, the Mediterranean forest, was deciduous, like European forests, but then with those changes, it changed into evergreens, sclerophyll forest. However, the forest is, the carob tree, harub, and the olive are part of this forest, evergreen forest. But what happened is that through continued habitation and degradation and grazing, the Mediterranean sclerophyll forest has degraded into scrubland, what we call in English a scrubland, but it is really also, the name is maquis or mattoral. And this is exactly what you find if you go to the beaches, if you go to the lower reaches next to the coast. It is really very low-lying plants. It depends. Maquis is higher. It's more than a meter higher. But then as it becomes more degraded, it becomes garrigue, which is lower, and then it becomes batha, which is even more degraded, and eventually you only have grasses. The maquis is very, very important because that biodiversity hotspot we spoke about, biodiversity is harbored and sheltered in those scrublands and in those degraded landscapes, and which are extremely valuable because they are wildlife habitats. But at the same time, our cultural perception always favors the forest. So we go to pine forest, we go to cedar forest, but the maquis and garrigue are just there. What are they? And this is a danger because it is very difficult to protect it, and it's very difficult to change perceptions to value the maquis. The map is the extent of the Mediterranean. Another shrub is pistachia, which is the same fustuk that we eat. So the Pistachia palestina is grafted, it becomes the fustuk that we eat. But pistachia has also many lentiscus, which is the mastix shrub, is the one that dominates in Cyprus. So more or less, this is a very rich natural setting, very diverse, very heterogeneous, and very rich with species, despite the degradation of the forest. Now we go to another diversity, which is not natural, but cultural. The Mediterranean is also a place where nature and culture have evolved perhaps longer than any other part of the world, the Mediterranean basin, not the other ones. So we look, nature is more or less all the living world that surrounds us and in us, of course, because we are part of nature, even if sometimes a Western conception or definition sets it apart from us. But we are also part of nature. And culture, I think the biggest definition is trying to make sense out of this world we live in through customs, through different values, morals, and putting a kind of a cosmos, a kind of a scheme for us is part of this culture, what we define. And it changes over time in the same place, and it changes from one place to another. Successive human civilizations impacted the Mediterranean ecosystem just as they were impacted by it through complex, and this is a word I will use a lot, co-evolution. They really co-evolved. And I think the best way to represent them is Zev Nave's diagram from his monumental book. Man, I object to the man because it's people or humans, as affected and as affected. This is what puts it apart from other species. We are affected by and in turn impact this environment. Because of this affected and effector, there are two theories about the Mediterranean, this co-evolution. One theory, the theory of the lost Eden, is that people really, human beings and successive civilizations ruined the Mediterranean because they degraded it and it is desertified, and desertification has ended. So this is one school of thought. And yes, there has been a lot of loss and degradation. But another school of thought, to which I believe in, says that no, the Mediterranean is the Mediterranean because of human management. And that is very much, I think, the case. As we said, successive people lying at the meeting point there. And the Mediterranean is a bridge, really, between Europe, Africa, Asia. People have moved. In the lower part here, you can see the earliest people to move were really the Phoenicians with their little boats. They didn't have very big boats. They colonized so many places which were later on became settlements. And the Greeks did the same. The Ottomans took a huge share. The Roman Empire was there. So this is a very, very powerful and a place where a lot of cultural exchange happened. If we look at today's Eastern Mediterranean map, it's very much the Middle East with Turkey in the north. You can see in the box that is outlined in red the diversity of ethnic and religious communities that inhabit this region. And if you compare it to the other diagrams, the rainfall, vegetation cover, and land use, you find a very close correspondence between the two. So this is a diverse, it's not just a diverse naturally. It is also a hotspot politically, I think, because there is a lot of, because of this diversity, there is a lot of issues that need to be aired and sorted. This is from a blogger called Sharro. He just put it together as a parody on what happens in the Middle East. At first, like many pre-modern civilizations, nature was idolized. The bull was one symbol of nature, and it was tamed. It was wild and a very powerful animal, and worshipped in Çatalhöyük. Most of the shrines there have bull horns in clay. It is worshipped it was drawn on cave paintings in Almira in Spain, on the robes of the goddess of Ephesus, and also in Egyptian mythology. Gradually, the bull was killed, just as, gradually as humans became more powerful, it became a symbol of overpowering nature, and nature was enslaved, like Mithraean community, which is originally a religion that comes from Iran, slaughtering the bull, part of the procession, and the Minotaur, of course, of Crete. We spoke about affector and affected. I think this is also a key theme in the region, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean, of people and gods battling chaos and battling the god of nothingness, of chaos, of destruction, of desertification, which was called in Aramaic, Mot was the name of the god. And Mot in Arabic is the same Semitic root as Mot in Arabic, which is death. So in a sense, there was always this battle between the ordered world, the cultivated generally world, the productive world, the fertile crescent that we refer to, and between this fear of the desertification, of chaos, of nothingness. And nowhere is this better expressed in the cultural perception and understanding of nature. The cultural conception of nature is very much productive, sustaining, and to be sustained. Gardens mirror this relationship with nature. For a very long while, I have researched what is the concept of landscape or garden in our part of the world. Because we don't have in Arabic a word for landscape, nor is there one in Turkish. We use paysage, which is French. So why we don't have a word is a very long story, and there's another lecture. But the thing is that the way we look at our surroundings differs, and what we favor differs. We are very much affected by this need for productivity. To find that out, I did a survey of village houses. In fact, it is called the hakura in Arabic, but it's an orchard garden. So it's a pleasure garden and a productive unit. But the first time I saw this garden was in North Cyprus. And so it's a very, very Mediterranean concept, and many Italian scholars have written about it. Basically, a garden that is a production unit. So there is pleasure in this production, and it is not just something to look at. Look, it does not prioritize vision as our understanding of garden and landscape does today. But it involves everything, all our senses. And as I said, it's very practical. Water was very, very rare, and people were not going to plant just flowers to look at and smell, but they wanted something more. And in fact, Stordalen, a historian of Eden, the concept of Eden in the Old and New Testaments, says that it was also an economic necessity because this was a region in political turmoil. So if you had some produce in your garden, it was self-sufficiency. So these are some views. These are the gardens I did. And there are, I think I've put the reference, so there is a complete study of these gardens and what they mean and how different they are from our conception of a garden in modern times. Another study I did is those same gardens. I compared the species I found in those gardens and compared them with the plants of the Bible and the plants of the Quran. And you see the incidence of the plants that you find in those same village garden. Nothing, lemon, carob, citrus is very favored, fig, injir, apples, mulberry, dud, oleander, olive, palm, so almond, apricot. So it is a very different conception of garden, which is, again, a very important one. So these cultural perceptions aside, let's move. We are already in the realm of landscape. We talked about nature-culture co-evolution. Okay, the product of nature-culture evolution is what? Everything around us, our environment. But we don't use environment, we use landscape, because whereas environment is more objective and out there, landscape has a lot of subjectivity to it. This is why it's a very attractive term. And you can see this in the European Landscape Convention definition of landscape, which says that landscapes are an area as perceived. It's not just as perceived by people whose character is the result of action and interaction of natural and or human factors. So perception counts. What I see in an English landscape is not what an English person would see in that landscape, and vice versa. So this is something that we should really take note of, because It affects a lot what we do. Landscape, at the same time, because of this perception and subjective dimension, landscape is also two things at once. It has two dimensions. The tangible dimension, the physicality of a tree, lawn, edge, a city, whatever it is, but the intangible, which is the cultural conceptions and perceptions associated with this landscape. Again, one shapes the other. So those two together are quite important to note of. So in the end, landscape, as I would like to define it, includes what is visible, what we see, what is invisible, because all the ecosystem and natural processes that shape this landscape, we don't see it, but it is part of the landscape, and what is intangible, as we spoke. So the cultural landscape is really, when we talk about the Mediterranean landscape is humanized. So it is really a cultural landscape. Even the wilderness, I mean, if you go in a continent from what is perceived as wild nature all the way to the city, the urban ecosystem, all of it is cultural landscape. But relative, I mean, it is relative how much there is. So here we have a forest, but many of the forests have been managed. A cultural landscape is important because it implies a unique pattern created by landscape shapes, particularly social organization, embracing first all of our surroundings, as we said. So how did this cultural landscape come to be? There have been many traditional practices that have shaped the Mediterranean cultural landscape. One of the earliest, 50,000 years ago and more, was fire. Fire was the easiest way to make clearings, to cultivate, to make space. So fire was undertaken. But over such long evolutionary periods, fire eventually became part of the ecosystem. Pine trees need fire so that the seedlings can crack and they can germinate. So, and many early colonizers after fire also need the fire because they can't grow in the forest, in the shade of the forest. So fire, which was a human practice, became part of the ecosystem. A second very important practice was domestication. Of course, the Fertile Crescent is in the Eastern Mediterranean, is where agriculture happened. So many plant species and animals were domesticated, and we benefit from these. Of course, sheep and goats are the most, the ones we see most of. Another practice which is very specific to the Mediterranean is stone terracing or agricultural terraces. I think this is an incredible. An 18th century European traveler commented when visiting Lebanon that in other places people cultivate land. In Lebanon, but it's not Lebanon, it's all the Eastern Mediterranean, people manufacture land. They produce land because when you terrace, when you create in a mountain country, when you create terraces, you do two things. You create a surface where you can plant, otherwise you couldn't plant. And also you retain water, rainwater, so it's a water conservation, and you have good soil. You protect the soil there. So it's an ingenious way to adapt to this mountainous country. And you see two examples of stone terracing from Lebanon from the north, shallow and more steep. What happens is that also, this is a very telling image, because what people do is that they carve out of the forest an area, they terrace it, they cultivate it. Terraces, I learned from Cyprus, my research in North Cyprus, is also a very, very flexible tool. If let's say the same landscape here, if the people didn't return in 10, 20, 30 years, nature would take the opportunity and colonize, recolonize, reclaim what it had been taken from it. So in a sense, the terraces are really equally beneficial as a structure for nature and for culture. So it's very interesting. I'd like to give an example, a tangible example from the American University of Beirut, where I teach and where I'm affiliated. The upper slide is from 1900, just the turn of the century. When Reverend Daniel Bliss, purchased the land, it was bare. There were just 1 or 2 carob and oak trees. There was nothing else. What he started building this university, bringing funds and everything. And then eventually he realized we have to do something about this landscape, and there was no money, and these were missionaries. So, they were very careful with how they spent their money. He looked around to see what are other people doing here. What they were doing is that they would do terraces, fill them up with soil, and plant plants that were very well adapted to the climate. He did the same. About 100 years later, the lower slide is what has happened. This is the same campus. Slowly, plants have colonized. Some were planted, others have colonized, and gradually through the maquis, through natural scrubland, it evolved into a most beautiful garden. It's really called the Garden of Beirut. If you look to the slide to your left-hand side, you will see the story in section. This is the original limestone that existed on this bare side, and this chocolate-colored brown is the humus, is the rich soil that was formed, partly maybe brought to the site, but also from the debris of dying material, which is really how the ecosystem works. So this is, again, a very important way that people managed. Another traditional practice is water conservation. Water is very scarce. Parts of Turkey and Lebanon are very rich with water resources, but still it is a scarce resource in the Eastern Mediterranean. And so people use all sorts of means. Some of those means is planting shallow water courses, because the soil will be moist and it will be very good soil that is being brought from upper limits. Another one is to create rain harvesting. So this is a pond in a village called Marwahin. I don't know how people 100 and 200 years ago could tell that the water would flow to this location, but they would have village ponds, and the rain would flow down to those village ponds, and those village ponds would be the only source of water they had. Cattle would drink from it, they would take water from it, and because they didn't have. They also rain harvest from their roofs to cisterns. So rain harvesting is a very important way of managing, and snow ponds also, for the snow to melt and for the water to remain there, and terracing, as we spoke. However, the really ingenious design of traditional practice in the Mediterranean are these two systems. One of them is called Silva, Saltus, Ager. Silva is forest. Saltus is grazing land, pastoral land. And Ager, of course, is from agriculture. So really combining these things. This is very much a Roman practice. It dates back to Roman times. And all three grow next to each other on different land plots. So there is a forest, and there is a field, and there is maybe some agriculture here. The second system is the Dehesa Montado. Dehesa in Portugal and Montado in Spain, or vice versa. I'm not very sure, I mix them. But this system is the one we have in the Eastern Mediterranean, where trees, pastoral activity, agriculture exist all on the same plot of land. So can you imagine how sustainable that is? So to use the same land. So olive trees and carob trees generally are the structure planting. Under them, cereal, grain is cultivated. When the cultivation is harvested, then the sheep and goat come and graze over there. So you have the produce of the tree, agriculture, pastoral activities. So 3 in 1. So it's a very sustainable and economically feasible practice. Recently, it has been in Australia, Mollison has written about it, calling it permaculture. This is another term you use, but basically this is what it is. So you have the two examples here, and these are incredible systems. I would like to move to the olive. Olive tree, as we explained, is very much a Mediterranean tree. And in fact, if you go out in the wild, you will see two species. I mean, these that I can recognize. There are many, many varieties, but two species. Oleaster is the wild olive. It will not have, the fruits are very tiny and not edible, very thorny, not a very inviting plant. But if it is grafted, then it turns into an olive tree, which is Olea europaea. And then it produces the olives that we value. And olives create an incredible landscape. They are hardy trees. Their leathery leaves can withstand the heat. And the olives that are rain-fed and not irrigated have a much richer and better taste than the olives that are irrigated. So you can imagine what a durable plant it is. So it is it can withstand and adapts very well to the climate, but at the same time, it does a service to the earth itself. It retains the water, it holds the soil together. So it's an incredible kind of landscape. One can call it almost a second nature, and it has been called a middle landscape. Generally, rural landscapes can be called middle landscape, but I call it a human-made nature. Of course, it's contradictory, the term, but the thing is that it is. And of course, the whole character of olive trees with other darker colors has been an inspiration to many artists like Van Gogh and others. One study in northern Cyprus, I was commissioned by a UN agency to do a complete survey. So I looked at the production, but I looked mainly at how olives were cultivated. And it is incredible how rich it is. Maybe because the island has been isolated, so you find a lot of the beauty of the olive. This is an olive tree, ancient olive tree, part of when we were doing the survey, which is 13 meters in circumference. It's huge, but it is one tree. It's from a monastery in Karşıyaka. And so you can see in terms of production and in terms of number of trees also, the total number of trees in production in Cyprus is incredible. But also interesting was the malleability of the landscape, of olive landscape. Olive and carob are generally mixed. You found we identified three different locations. Olive plantations that served as buffers between the forest and agriculture land in the top view. And here you can see the terraces and you can see some of the forest trees descending into the ravine. Forests in olive cultivations in the dere, in the river itself, in the water course. And then olive cultivation around settlements. So it's such a flexible structure, and it is such a sustainable, beautiful landscape. It's not just productive. This is a view from South Lebanon, also from Iblis Sa'i. So traditional practices, sometimes they're pollarded, cut so that the tree doesn't grow high, so that it's easier to pick the trees, like some of the slides. Sometimes they irrigate them and create like small trenches. Sometimes they're with terraces, grazing goes on. But there is a very big threat to olives and olive landscapes, mainly from building, from rising land values, but also not just physical, but also for the importation of olives from Turkey, from mainland Turkey. Because what happens, it undermines local production, which is always more costly. So the thing is that it is very difficult to manage them. In Europe, olive landscapes are threatened by the agriculture policy, the European agriculture policy, because it is focusing on productivity. It's not just productivity. These trees and these landscapes have an environmental and ecological role that has to be appreciated also. To end the landscape reading on a darker side, we look at what is happening today in the Mediterranean. I mean, urbanization maybe is one of the most obvious impacts on the Mediterranean landscape, but also tourism, mass tourism. And worse than tourism is what comes, the paraphernalia that come with tourism, so that if there is a tourist resort, there are shops and there are then garages, and then suddenly you find this is happening in North Cyprus. I remember when I was, it's intact. So you can see that for 2015, Cairo and Istanbul are the biggest cities in the Eastern Mediterranean. So this is something we have to deal with. Another issue is the excessive consumption. Cities are really consuming all the resources of the region, whether it's water, whether it's energy, and in a sense polluting. You can see the conurbations and the large agglomeration. We have to think in terms of ecological footprint of cities, which we rarely do. Another threat comes from a very different aspect, from market-led development, neoliberal development, namely creating exclusive spaces within the landscape, gated. This is an example of a landscape. I'm working part of an activist group which have been working for about a year on this last remaining natural coast of Beirut. And it was purchased, even though it is state-owned and shouldn't have been purchased. And now it is being fenced so that it creates 5, 10-star hotel or how many for very exclusive people at a time when this stretch here is the only public beach in the city, the only place where people can go and swim. So this is also a threat to our cities. It is fragmenting cities and the countryside. It's not just in cities. And I put 2 slides from the newly developed city center, which is very market-driven, almost privatized, very clean, beautiful details, beautiful materials. And they're not very beautiful, but very, very enjoyable and practical. A public sea walk, the Corniche, the boulevard of the sea, where everybody can go and everybody is accepted. So this is also something we have to think of. Some projects of this neoliberal vision in Lebanon. One called Zinat Sannin, which is a huge complex with a helipad and luxury hotels and all sorts of things on top of Sannin Mountain. And this is Sannin Mountain. It is almost iconic. How can you create something like that on it, seen from the villages? Another is Cedar Island, like Palm Island, which is something that is very much influencing development in our part of the world. So let's move to the fourth part, looking at writing. So what concepts can we derive from this landscape reading that we have? How can we ensure that Mediterranean ecosystems remain resilient and diverse and sustainable, and that humans and nature can evolve? Ecological landscape design planning is something I have practiced, and I have found some concepts. There are many other ways, but this is the way that I will discuss. It's the way I know, because the focus is on processes and not on product, because it is spatially expansive, a reading. It looks at a total. It's very integrative. And because it's holistic, it looks at systems and not just as components. One of those principles that we learn is fluidity across temporal and spatial scales. This is a diagram, again, from Nave's book, looking at the ecosphere, which is the total ecosystem of the Earth. And you see within this total ecosystem, there is a hierarchy from the smallest, whether it's technosphere from the city or the nature and agriculture, and progressing all the way to the ecosphere. Representing this within a landscape diagram, you find that, again, landscapes are contiguous. You cannot say this is where landscapes stop. They don't follow borders and boundaries. They just continue. And so you have to accept that and look at the totality. By looking I hope I will show you in Cyprus, the example, that if you look at the regional and then you look at the local, there is a very big correspondence. The regional helps you understand the local, and the local will help you decipher the regional. So this movement is very, very important from the local to the regional. This is the hierarchical spatial scale. There is also another scale, which is temporal, which is also very important. There is also a fluidity there, as I just talked about the evolution of the Mediterranean landscape. Another one is complexity and self-organization. In the cultural landscape continuum that I showed, the closer you are to the city, the less sustainable, and the further you are, the more. There is a diagram I will show, but the complexity is at its most in more natural, open landscapes, and there it is really self-sustaining. It is self-organizing the system. When man impacts and interferes, gradually this is lost until the system is no longer sustainable and not complex. Sustainability and complexity come together. Biodiversity and landscape heterogeneity is another principle that we say. Heterogeneity, not uniformity. And one of the threats of urbanization is homogenization of space or of landscapes, where everything is the same. If I'm in Dubai or in Beirut or anywhere, it's the same buildings and the same, and this is very dangerous. Why is biodiversity important? It is important for its own sake, because if you have a diversity, these are plants and animals that co-evolved with us all the way, and it is sad to lose them. But biodiversity is also important because biodiversity means resilience of a system. When there is diversity, even in an economic situation in gardening, if you have several trees, if one of them is hit or doesn't produce, or you have another, it's the same with biodiversity. So it is important. And biodiversity is our natural heritage. And at the same time, in the Mediterranean, it is also our cultural heritage, because the biodiversity is also a product of the landscapes that we have shaped in the Mediterranean. And this is a diagram I made about the Middle East. I was trying to show that rural landscape heritage is very much a cultural heritage with agriculture, sedentary, nomadic, and a natural heritage. Sustainability is another one, and a term I will introduce, evolutionability, which is a mouthful. But this is the diagram I was telling you about. The more... this is again from Nave, and you can see that nature is completely sustainable. It can stand on its own. Olive trees, if you plant them, they will survive, they will produce, they will be fine. But as you get down to the city, it becomes less and less. So agriculture is less sustainable. It depends on us, unless it's agriculture of a specific site, all the way to the city, which is not very sustainable. Kiner, I have the reference below, introduces the concept of evolutionability, coming from evolution. Why? Because he says sustainability is not enough. Mainly sustainability, what Gro Harlem said, is that we need to give to future generations, we need to secure for them what we received as well. So we don't give them a inheritance that's missing. So we have to leave as much as we took. This is not enough, Kiner argues, because in this typical egg diagram of sustainability, it says that flow across people to ecosystem ensures the well-being of people. But people are not it's not just the people that we are concerned about. What about the ecosystem itself? What he proposes is that we've come from survivability to sustainability to evolutionability, namely that we should improve what we have and leave future generations with more sustainable alternatives that they can make use of. It's just another way of looking beyond sustainability. And this is what we spoke about a lot, multifunctionality. namely olive and carob planting. This is a research I did. We were talking on, it was part of a publication which is coming out on European island landscapes. And here is it's about scenario planning. It's a special approach to scenario planning and visualization. So this is a very brief representation of this multifunctional landscape of Northern Europe, Northern Cyprus, sorry. And what I have put here is to show how this landscape can provide an interface. How can it be used differently from just, it's not just agriculture. So if we look at it, it can be part of urban green area network, it can be part of productive landscape, it can be a wildlife habitat, and as a landscape function, it can look at amenity. I mean, when it's in the periphery, instead of creating a park for a village, that becomes the park. So this multifunctionality is a very, very important way of going about. It can be used as buffering, it can be used for biodiversity creation. I move on. You'll be happy to know I have 3 examples that I will discuss. This one is from North Cyprus. North Cyprus is a very, very beautiful, captivating part of the world, really. You have the Kyrenia mountain range, which is about 1,000 meters above sea level. The Troodos is in the south is 2,000. But you have this, and you have a long coastal plain, fully cultivated with olives and carob, with little villages. The beaches are beautiful. The diversity of plants is incredible. I was part of a venture over there in 1990 by a company from Finland, working with British architects and planners. I was a landscape architect, to do a tourist development. We started doing the tourist development, and all the time I was praying that the project would stop because the landscape was so beautiful, and I didn't want us to, I mean, no matter how ecologically and sustainable we did it, it's still, I wanted to know more about this landscape, and it did stop. The Finnish company went bust, and so the project just remained on paper. But it was a chance for me to explore the landscape and the beauty of this landscape and ecology in my PhD thesis. So a lot of those diagrams come from there. You can see how beautiful the mountains are, and actually the high. But look at the mosaic. This is a word I forgot to use. Blondel calls it moving mosaics. Why? Because the patches we talked about, forests and agriculture, change. Maybe the forest comes, takes over the agriculture, and then maybe no, I go take more forest and make it. So it's a very, very flexible system. But you can see it here very clearly in this very simple diagram. In the dark green are the patches of forest that were protected, and it is a protected by state. The darker green is the maquis, the very dense scrubland, which is buffering really those forests. Otherwise, they would be threatened. And then the crisscross in orange is the olive and carob. So you see how all of these 3 components come together so beautifully along the entire coast. And of course, in red is settlement. But look at the lower diagram. This is the Plan-Lama Dairesi. They had done a very nice diagram to sketch how roadside development can erode. So there is Girne, but then west of Girne, small little villages are developing with tourism and becoming one long merging. This is a poster I did. I went around and looked at the Anit ağaçlar, the monumental trees of North Cyprus, and they have so many. This olive tree is 400 years old. It was planted from Venetian times when they occupied the island. And there are many. There are oaks and arbutus. Again, this is the maquis along the coast. This is a diagram. The method I used was, it's all in, you can read about it, so I won't elaborate, but mainly looking at, as a designer, looking at associations. I call them ELA, Ecological Landscape Association, how to put together different components like olives in the ravine, maki in the uplands, and create blocks that I can understand, look at the landscape within these self-sustaining blocks, but these blocks can then be recycled into a design. So in a sense, it is dual. It is a way of understanding how this landscape evolved, but also I can use them and integrate them, which is what I did. This is the Dik Burun site. It is a peninsula that goes into along the northern coast, very close to Esentepe. This is Esentepe. This is the landscape of Esentepe. And so you have, it's beautiful. There is a ravine, there is a water course that goes to the sea. There are beautiful cliffs with pistachia, and there is a huge plateau with olive and carob that is used for grazing. So what I did is I said, look here to the team, this river and this plateau where there is the olives has to be protected. Of course, they were very upset because this is prime development land. I mean, this is the heart of the project. So they wanted to put their hotels and motels. I said, no, please. Oh, I don't know how, but I argued teeth and nails just to protect those two. In the end, what happened is that the master plan complied. We developed the master plan protecting those two components. Look at what happens. The center of this project is this beautiful plateau where more olives can be planted. It can even be managed with pastoral activities, so sheep and goat can come in. And why do this? And of course, the ravine is the natural landscape where you protect all the vegetation that's in there, which is a very, very fine ecosystem. Why do we do this? Many reasons. First of all, how did I argue with the developer? Of course, they don't care much about ecology, but why they accepted is I said, look, if you do this, it will cut on maintenance cost. You don't have to maintain those huge chunks. You don't need water, you don't need electricity. And they thought, yes, that makes good sense. So this is how I managed to convince them. But what happens? Why do this? Because it's environmentally sustainable, it's economically feasible, but also if we protect a little bit of the landscape in those projects that we do around, inside, then we can maybe overcome some of the homogeneity that is taking place. So that was the main, this is a view of the project as it stands on paper. The second project is from Sidon. It is USDS, Urban Sustainable Development Strategies, and it was a project funded by Med Cities, if some of you are familiar with them. Izmir is one of the Med City chain. Namely, it is looking at Mediterranean cities so that they coordinate strategies and they develop sustainably. And the project had there was a specific methodology we followed. We had it is different from a master plan because you develop a framework so that they know they have a vision, they know where they're going, and they can plug in their project. So it's more flexible than a master plan. So it goes through city descriptive memory, strategies, and then an action plan. The project components is heritage, but of course heritage is always architectural heritage. I am an architect too, but there is more than architectural heritage. But generally, you know, it's the archaeological and the tangible, which is a heritage. Landscape, environment, and ecology, which was not landscape, it was just environment and ecology. And I argued that if we bring in landscape, you can have more spatialized solutions rather than just analysis of the environment. And governance, urban economic strategies, and local. I'll go quickly through it. It's a very beautiful city. This is the map of Lebanon, and you can see in a way it replicates North Cyprus because again you have the Mount Lebanon. Of course, it's 3,000 meters, very tall mountains, snow-peaked even in August. And then you have a beautiful coast. Sidon is right here. It's a Phoenician city, very, very old. And this is the final project I will discuss. So this is, you can see part of the fort, the water fort, and there is a land fort and part of the harbor of the city. The geomorphology, again, is very much like all of the Mediterranean. Whenever the mountain comes close to the sea, you always find water courses interrupted, and you find this. So you have small hillocks, and you have agriculture. When you look from the coast, you see those little hills, and when you look from there, you see the cultivated plain. Small rivers and streams punctuate this beautiful landscape, but I don't know here, but unfortunately, they're also used to dump sewage, because rivers and water courses are public property, so they do not remain. So, you can dump in them, nobody will come and count you. So rivers are beautiful, but degraded. The agriculture has shrunk. Initially, the old city, up until the 50s, as soon as you leave the walls, you have beautiful orchards where people go and picnic and enjoy themselves. So they don't really need parks and green areas, but with building, they do, and there are none. There is very interesting ancient irrigation system from Ottoman times, which takes water from the Oweli River and distributes it to the fields. And there are few green areas. There is an abandoned railway track that is also railway corridor, which was also utilized. So these are the tracks of investigation and the vision. So to look at agriculture, to protect agriculture. The problem with agriculture is that as the city grows, it's the same in Istanbul and everywhere, the land value is very high. So people don't want to cultivate. If they sell the land, they will get much more money. Also, other people with money, will come and buy those lands at a time when there is very little else happening, hoard the lands, and eventually develop them, as I said, but not for the people there, but for higher income people. So we propose the strategic protection of Saida's agriculture, water resources to protect the ecological health and spatial integrity of the corridors, of the river corridors, as a multifunctional green corridor, and green open spaces to increase the allocation to comply with EU. A nice thing about the USDS methodology is that it works with people. So one of the outcomes was that a small group of a local NGO worked on the railway corridor and developed with youth to clean the corridor and to start utilizing it as a green space, which is wonderful, because this is why this project is. This is an abstract representation of the project outcome. Basically, they were looking to a green park, but the thing is that you don't need a park. You need a network of green spaces. And this is what we argued, so that you have the diversity and heterogeneity we speak of. A student of mine, master's degree student, took some of these strategies and developed them to find ways of integrating into land pooling and subdivision ecological criteria and the natural landscape of the Mediterranean. The final example is from North Lebanon. It is marginal landscape, very beautiful site, 150 hectares, just over Tripoli. And a rich landowner has the land, and he said, I want a project that is sustainable environmentally. It's very heavily forested with a lot of aromatic herbs and grazing and some organic agriculture. So what we did is that AUB Nature Conservation Center took this project on. And what is important is that we worked in very different disciplines. Shadi Hamada is an animal scientist. He worked on sheep and goat rearing. Khalid is an agriculturist. Selma is a nature conservationist. Najat, chemistry. She worked on how do you, essential oil extraction, how do you do that? What is the process and how can you do it? And Malik Batal is food production and community health, and I was working on the landscape. So this was the project vision. The project concept is very much a Mediterranean multifunctional landscape that we spoke of. And it is inspired by the villages around. Core objective is high tech, really, because it's high quality essential oil production, mainly from sage, adachai, yes? So from sage, there's a lot of sage, and sage is medicinal. So how do we collect the sage and how do we propagate it? And fringe benefits are cottage cheese industry, goat and sheep herding, and composting unit, and also community extension. We had a lot of meetings with the community. So this was the outcome of the project. So you can see what we did is that we plugged in. The idea was, it was almost like a Disneyland. You go to Disneyland or Disney World and you see Fantasyland, you see Frontierland, you see all sorts of things. It's the same. If I am a farmer or I am a local businessman or I'm an investor, we're sick and tired of ecotourism. Everything is ecotourism. Every time you go to the mountains and a nice site, it's eco. There's something more than ecotourism. There must be. So this was the alternative we found that could also work. So you can come to this place and you can say, this is best practice in goat rearing. Okay, what do they do? And cheese production. I would like to do that on my land or on my farm. So it becomes like a model for people to see, but also for people to see the total, not just to take one aspect. So the slides are basically, this is the oil production, and my colleague in Unit 44, Abdul Halim, did the design of that. It was very difficult because how do you dry the sage in a limited area, with hot air, with low technology if you can, and then how do you extract it and so on. And there's the organic farming. Then there is the cottage cheese production, and Malik was in charge of that, and they gave us guidelines for the design. We did the flow chart. This is the barn. This is also very important to propagate. We're not going to harvest the wild. That would be very unsustainable. So how do we propagate sage so that we have the sage on the same land, we cultivate it, and we harvest it so that it's sustainable? So I will conclude with this diagram. Can people in the Mediterranean nature co-evolve in the 21st century? If we look at the concerns, I have aggregated it into concerns: spatial, heritage, and identity, because we said homogenizing of space, environment, ecosystem, human, and political. The underlying ecological planning principles are the ones I just showed in those diagrams: fluidity across scales, complexity of systems, multifunctionality, multidisciplinarity, and culture and place specificity. And we look at the symbiotic development and evolutionarity. We have the responsive, context-specific, stewardship, and inclusive conservation, conservation that comes from the people. We cannot just impose conservation from top through policies. If the people are not convinced that they don't benefit, no conservation will happen, at least not in Lebanon. We don't have a powerful government. Stewardship of local communities, and people have managed the landscape for so long, they should continue to do that. Also restorative and participatory, it's the same concept, to restore ecosystems and to look at processes. And developmental and empowering. Empowering people is also a very important part of those projects, whether it's in SAIDA or not. So the outlook to the future, far from being outdated, the Mediterranean is really a living heritage. And that long-term robustness of coupled human-natural systems can guide sustainable development. And I hope it can inspire future designers. Thank you, and I apologize for the long time. Yes, of course. With pleasure. Sorry? I think they're very tired. Everybody's very tired.
I'd like to ask if you can give some examples of modern settlements from around the Mediterranean that you appreciate in terms of the merging of cultural and natural aspects of the region.
Yes, it's a difficult question.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
There is no, not that I know of, no settlement as such. Don't forget, you're talking about a region, the Eastern Mediterranean, which has been settled for millennia. So why would one establish a new settlement? But there would be maybe neighborhoods and parts of settlements that have been designed in a more appropriate fashion. Again, I don't know any. Because it's a very difficult question. It's very, very complex, the region we live in. I mean, part of the problem we have is that what I tried to convey, namely that we are always looking, what we discussed, we're always looking to the West, and we're not looking to what we have. We have so much. I mean, the systems I spoke of, rainwater harvesting, multifunctionality, the sustainability of systems, using native species, these are all ecological principles that the West is now almost providing as guidelines. We have them in our landscape, in our settlements, but we don't look to them. Not only do we not appreciate them and value them and understand them eventually, but in addition, we are infatuated by everything that comes from the West. And we're so eager to apply Western standards in architecture or in forms, so that it becomes very difficult to find what you're looking at. But, so yes, I can't. In Lebanon, I don't know of any. I've worked in Syria. I haven't seen any. There are... it's a different answer. It's not the answer you're looking for. But there are sometimes projects which offer prudent and clever management of natural and village and folk and vernacular culture, which is very, very good. This is the closest I can come. So it's not physically an entity, which is new, and but it is taking an existing settlement or nomadic, for example, in Jordan, they've done a lot in Ram, Wadi Ram. And they have created a whole economy and system of livelihoods and of production of artifacts within this very diverse landscape, thus maintaining the landscape, maintaining traditional ways of life. So that is the closest I can say. And some initiatives, but nothing nothing like a totally new settlement or.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. I am curious about the category of Mediterranean, and I was wondering what made you choose that category, and if you find that you run into resistance in academia or perhaps in funding agencies to this category. I mean, when you work on landscape, the land is the land and no one can deny it. But there are many who would culturally challenge a conceptual category of Mediterranean. I'm not one of them. I like it, But I find that there's a lot of resistance. And I was wondering if you have encountered that and how you deal with it. And I think it's relevant for this entire series of talks.
Absolutely.
And it's something I'd like to hear arguments for in favor of Mediterranean.
Yes, I think that's a very good question. I haven't had problems because I am rooted in the ecological sciences. And when I say Mediterranean type ecosystem, it's not something I invented, but this is De Castries' famous book, De Castries and Mooney. It is called the Mediterranean ecosystem, and it is recognized, as I showed, as a biome. It is recognized as a biodiversity hotspot. So when you look to the natural, yes, there is an entity, a totality, which is Mediterranean. But you are right. When you come to the human and cultural, there is, I believe there is, but it is more difficult to pin down. And I think one thing in favor of this category is really EU policies and funding, because suddenly Europe has realized that it is still part of this basin, whether it likes it or not. And because of migration and because of many other things, this good neighborly attitude of trying to look at the totality. For example, the urban sustainable development by MedCities is part of that initiative. To look at cities all around the Mediterranean, and it's based in Barcelona, which is providing the know-how and the technicality. So there is also this willingness of bringing it together. But especially when you come to the Eastern Middle East, the Middle East is almost, if you draw a line between Malta and Italy, there's almost this part, or even less, Egypt is, and then there's the North African. Over there, the separation is big, but the Eastern Mediterranean, some of the maps I showed, it's so integrated historically in his, cultural and evolutionary history is incredibly integrated. It is a very, very diverse. So you look at the Arab component, you look at the Turkish component, you look at religions that are different, there's just so many. But I think that I would, maybe because I'm in landscape, I would go back to the natural and have it. Somebody spoke, a Frenchman in Beirut recently, and he was looking at the divisions of early divisions of the Middle East, mainly Middle East up to Turkey, how they looked at geographical features to divide. And I think that is, the natural features are a very good guideline for us to look at. A lot of the boundaries that were created post-World War I by Sykes-Picot Agreement don't make much sense. I mean, why is this bit here and not to the north? Why is that bit? So I don't know whether there could be a time when we can look to being more the Mediterranean basin of the Roman Empire or the Ottoman Empire, which was much more, there was much more uniformity, accepting the diversity. There was still diversity, there were still different peoples and different religions, but somehow there was a system, they all felt part of a total. So I think one can play that if you're looking for funding, to look at the natural and the geographical, but also to look at bringing those people back together. Some of them have fallen apart. And maybe nature is one way of bringing those people together. The sea.
Common interest in the natural. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this informative talk. You referenced in your talk this lack of the word landscape.
Yes.
In both Turkish and Arabic.
Yes.
And in your article, Landscape in the Middle East and Inquiry, you also make the argument that the development of the concept of landscape has a lot to do with the development of linear perspective in Renaissance Europe.
Yes.
Which was obviously a Europe-based movement, and it didn't spread as quickly and as widely as people now think. And I just wonder if that European-centric movement or the consequences of this can be applied to architecture as well, in some sense, because, for example, Gülür Necipoğlu argues that the magnificence or grandiloquence of the Topkapı Sarayı is not the same as of a 16th century, well, I mean, they're 16th century, let's say, not Italian, but British, palace. It has to do a lot with the procession through the gates and modification of your senses as you go through those gates, the withdrawal of sound and all that. So I wonder if there are any parallels that you could think of.
I think yes, there are parallels. I think it's a little bit of what I described a little earlier, that looking to, I mean, we have a very long way to go to look to our conception of landscape. But landscape is more complex than architecture. Why? Because landscape, because it has very much this intangible dimension to it, and because it is ephemeral, it's not as solid. You have a building, it's there, it will still be there 100 years later. Landscapes are different. They will die. Another landscape, they are moving always. It's very much more dynamic, both in dynamic spatially, but temporally also. So it's difficult a little bit to draw the analogy between the two. But I think that if you remember when I said that this fight against nothingness, this fight against this wanting to make something productive and enclosed, and this enclosure is a very important part of our conception of how we see landscape and how we appreciate it, how we understand it. And it was also a little bit in medieval Europe. It was only in the Renaissance that this changed. The problem with the perspectival view is not just that it prioritizes the visual, but it is very not Eurocentric, but anthropocentric. Because I see the landscape from where I am, where I stand. As Versailles is the epitome of this view. That all of it is. Why am I not part in the middle of this landscape and part of this natural? So it's a very top-heavy sort of way of looking at landscape, which I don't know whether it existed here. I mean, we never, as you said, we never really caught on to that. And prioritizing the visual. I mean, if you look to our landscapes, generally, I don't know, it's difficult. The Mediterranean is so diverse, but it's generally, the beauty is in the walking through the city, the processional ways, and the light and shade and sound, that it's a very, very different way of perceiving landscape and appreciating them. So this is, I think, again, an important. But another way of to move away from the visual and that, a colleague of mine in, I think, Antalya University is, for example, looking at, just like I did in Lebanon, looking at what are vernacular Turkish terms that are used to describe landscape. And I did this in a village also in South Lebanon. I didn't use landscape. Anyway, I couldn't because there was no work. So I knew the village. I had worked there professionally. So I'd said, which one of those do you think represents the village, for example? The forest, the woodland, the olive groves, the spring? So I referred to locations. And it's incredible what comes out of that, They have a very clear perception. There was a very rich vocabulary of landscape, water-related, topographic, and plant features. Like, this is the side, this is a ravine, this is a rocky area, this is a sandy area. So they have a very rich vocabulary, but there is no totality. So we have to continue to look at these vernacular terms and to look to literature again and to look to, it's an interdisciplinary thing to try to find what the conception is. And again, history. I think historically it's very important to look to poetry and how it changed, songs and how they bring in how landscape goes. I know in Lebanon, for example, pre-Civil War songs were all about the Daya, the village. The village watering point, the village high, the moon coming. It's all nature, village beauty. After the Civil War, there was no more this. That was completely disappeared from the songs, and the songs about something else. So looking at all of those cultural facets, I think, will help us understand what landscape is. I don't know. I'm still searching and trying.
It was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed it very much, and I learned a lot. So thank you very much. Now, most of the examples that you provided are coming from regions which are not entirely destroyed.
Yes.
I'm not choosing my words maybe carefully, but
no.
There are cases where the Mediterranean element has been destroyed entirely. Now, question is, can anything be done in the sense of sort of a restoration ecology to transform these monstrosities into something which is, can we get them back into the Mediterranean realm, so to speak? That's the question I kept asking myself when I was looking at your examples, there.
Yes, this is it depends on what is destroyed. If what is destroyed is a landscape, if it's an open landscape, everything is a landscape. But if it is an open landscape like fields and a mountainside that has been quarried or something, then each one has a different solution. There is no one solution. If it is possible to rehabilitate, like they do post quarrying, for example, sometimes it's possible to do that. If it is fields and agricultural landscapes that have been abandoned and they are no longer there, then you have to look to economic feasibility and agribusiness proposals to revive it if you want to keep that agriculture. If it is a village that has been destroyed and horrible buildings built, again, as architects and designers, it is a challenge, again, just like archaeologists reconstruct. We can look at what there is, how was it destroyed, but also why was it destroyed, and do the people want to restore it or not? It's not what we want. If the people there are interested in reclaiming some of these heritage, then it is possible to work with them. Some of the concepts the planning principles I propose will work in any. They are exemplified. You can see them, they're embodied in the Mediterranean landscape, but they can be applied anywhere. I've applied them in Baghdad, which is not a Mediterranean landscape. A lot of this, the multifunctionality, the hierarchy, the fluidity. So some of the concepts can be used to design new settlements. Some of them can be used to restore others. And so, it is possible. I think it is possible to look at ruin. And again, just like you would, for example, it's not maybe a very good example, but like Bilgi University, I was very impressed to see those beautiful industrial buildings recycled and reused in such a beautiful manner that preserves them and creates an environment, both architecture and open spaces, that is unique, that cannot be replicated because it is. So sometimes even destroyed landscapes, as you talk about them, there might be something that can be salvaged and something that can be upgraded. I think we define creativity not very well. I talk sometimes creativity is how very different it is. It's not always that. Sometimes creativity is how you find solutions that can reharmonize environments so that they are not destroyed, as you were mentioning.
Of course, there is the cultural landscape also. The landscape in the people's minds.
Absolutely.
And that has been so much transformed by the so-called non-native elements in the region, and that's getting rid of those elements is another challenge, I would say.
Yes, but if you go back 100 years, or maybe a little more or less, not many people appreciated the old jumba and the old houses, the Ottoman maybe, you know. There's, no, this is eski, this is old, and we don't want this. But look at how most people now value those but when people started, they were not very much valued. In the Sidon project, when I was talking about the rivers and restoring them, the municipality and all the participants were laughing at me. They said, rivers? What rivers? These are sewers. Look at them. You're crazy. Agriculture? There is no more agriculture. We made the calculations, showed them that still 1/3 of the municipal area is agriculture. We showed them examples of rivers that had been restored. And then when the Barcelona team came and showed what they had done with the rivers, then they said, yes, maybe she's right. So sometimes it takes people from outside to come and point out that. So yes, you're right. Perceptions need to change. They will, but it will take time. It's not easy.